everybody. Welcome to the BSB Bookathon, day two. The panel is it's toxic, but I love it. Why messy relationships work in fiction. I'm Barbara Ann Wright, an author and editor with BSB, and I'll be your moderator. A reminder to all of our viewers using Zoom, if you set your screen to gallery view, you can see all of us. The chat roll is live for your comments, but if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A. I'll check that periodically, and we might have time to take those questions at the end. First, let me introduce our wonderful panelists before I grill them mercilessly. Radclyffe has written 70-plus romances in various genres, her latest being the 8th in the First Responders series. Her July title, Code Call, an ER romance, will be released in July. Sam Ledel grew up in the sprawling DFW metroplex of Texas. After graduating with her BA in creative writing, she found a calling in education and has worked in the field for 15 years. Her debut novel, Rocks and Stars, was a GCLS finalist for young adult fiction. She is twice finalist in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards, and her 2025 historical romance, Discovering Gold, placed first in women's fiction in the CIPA Evie Book Awards. Yes, I did it. Sam lives outside of Denver with her wife. She's working on her 10th novel, which sounds absolutely crazy when she says it out loud, but it's in fact amazing. Suzanne Lenoir is the author of the Valmora series of fantasy novels from Bold Strokes Books. Her first novel, A Talent Within, was a 2024 GCLS Goldie finalist in both the debut novel and science fiction fantasy categories. Her latest novel, Good Game, is an empowering contemporary romance that tackles the subject of women in esports. Suzanne is a technophile video gamer and history buff. She's a technophile video gamer and history buff. At the moment, you can find her obsessing over Thai GL series. She's an Emmy Bonnie fan. If you know what that means, then you know. If you know, you know. Award-winning sapphic novelist Suzie Clarke lives in Ohio. She grew up as a middle child surrounded by brothers, which is probably why her stories focus on strong female characters who know how to stand up for themselves. She loves a good laugh, and her favorite place is being where she can enjoy nature's gifts. She writes romantic blend in historic and contemporary settings. When asked once in an interview how she became a writer, she said, "I picked up a pen and started writing stories when I was 8 years old. I don't think you can force yourself to become a writer. It's a gift, a talent. Some people don't develop it, others give up, but some allow themselves to fail, learn, and then keep going on the journey. Being published does not define you as a writer. What's inside you and what comes out as the written word, that's what defines you as a writer." Suzie's current release, Secrets Under Junipers, is a cold case whodunit with lots of suspense, action, and romance. You can find her on the web at suzieclarke.com. Okay, let's dive right into these questions here. First one, give us an example of a messy relationship in your work and what makes it toxic. And I have to pick on Rad first because I told her I would.
Did you tell me that? Because I don't remember, and I just had to scribble down a couple of notes. I think this is a really interesting and difficult topic because toxic to me implies not good, or
Yes.
even beyond not good, it implies something very negative, which I think is really tough when you're building a relationship, because whatever the dynamic is, it has to be a forgivable fault. Okay, my thought as to something that's forgivable, but also can create a significant issue within a relationship, is someone who is extremely internalized, remote, and uncommunicative. It's not an unforgivable sin, but it is certainly a barrier to developing the relationship. And if the other character is one who needs affirmation, or support, and they're not getting it, I would say that's one thing that might define a toxic relationship that's redeemable.
Can you think of one of the relationships you've written that you would, well, that someone might say is toxic, or should we circle back to that?
Yeah, why don't you circle back? I mean,
Okay.
I can tell you real quick, it's not my forte. It's not what I usually build into conflict, but I can probably come up with something. But
don't worry,
we
can come back.
Okay. Save me now.
Okay, Sam, how about you?
Yeah, kind of like Radclyffe, when I was first thinking about this, I also went, well, this is, I think, very negative connotations when I hear toxic relationship. So I decided to go to one of the definitions of it to kind of give me some groundwork to go off of. And one of the definitions of a toxic relationship is a dynamic that often involves manipulation, control, and emotional abuse that can lead to feelings of low self-esteem and insecurity for the affected individual. So when I was thinking about that, I was reflecting on my very first novel, Rocks and Stars. My protagonist in that novel is, to sum her up in one word, messy. She's in college. Her name is Kyle. And for me, college was and can be a very good breeding ground for messy relationships and relationships that could potentially be labeled as toxic or are or could skew towards toxic eventually if certain habits are not broken by the individuals involved. Certainly for Kyle in that story, she isn't completely secure in who she is in across most of that story, and she has to come into her own, and she ends up landing in this somewhat of a love triangle between the quasi bad girl and the charming goalie on her soccer team. Obviously, the charming goalie is the right choice in that love triangle, but because of the way that Kyle has been brought up and the way that she views herself and things like that, she gets caught up in the bad girl, the toxic relationship that is overwhelmingly intoxicating to her. So she ends up making some poor choices over the course of that. Um, so that is what I thought of when it came to my own personal work. But outside of romantic relationships, I write a lot about family dynamics and characters having to free themselves from the constraints of obligations, whether they're self-imposed or by members of their own family, whether it's an alcoholic father who is relying too much on his daughter to be the caretaker, or a mentally abusive mother who has her daughter under her thumb. I love to explore those types of relationships in my work. And to me, those are toxic, whether it's, to a certain extreme or not, but it's something that the protagonists have to work their way out of. And often the romance in the novel is what helps them realize that that is a possibility for them.
Well, as Sandy as has pointed out, the relationship that doesn't have to be the romantic one. We can talk about the ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, or the relationship to the antagonist if there is one. I should have pointed that out in the questions beforehand, but said any of those will work. We have no boundaries here on the toxic relationship panel. So with that in mind, Suzanne, let's hear about a toxic relationship in one of your books.
Okay, so um, similarly to everyone else, I don't feel like in the romantic partnerships in my novels do not have toxic traits per se. In my fantasy novels, there was definitely a power imbalance between the two main characters, and there were secrets and lies, but they had very strong reasons, so they weren't necessarily red flags. In Good Game, my new novel, which takes place in esports environment, the entire environment is toxic. So having the character relationship between the two main characters being toxic would have been way too much, because they are in this gaming world that is very male dominated and tends to be very youthful. So there's a lot of bad behavior there, and so they are playing off of people who are the owner of the team sort of behaves in a manner that's inappropriate, and he almost doesn't realize it because he came out of that same system. And also one of the teammates is a toxic foil to the female main character, Sam, who is the first girl on the team. So for me, it was more about building that sort of uncomfortable environment world around them. So they're sort of sitting in a toxic mire, mired in toxicity as it is. So that's kind of where I was with Good Game.
Suzie.
I was thinking about what everybody said, and it's so important. I agree. It's so important that what Red had said about it has to be, first of all, it has to be in the end, it has to give some kind of satisfying feeling to the reader, or it's just, they're going to take the book and throw it across the room and say, forget it, I'm never going to read that writer again. But I think that probably the most toxic character that I had in any of the books was Ishi Yamiko in the 3-book series, the Shadow series with Moon Shadow, Shadows of Steel, and Shadow Dancer. She's introduced in Shadows of Steel, and she just tormented Rachel, the main character. She just was horrible to her and just came after her with a vengeance. So I'd say that was the most toxic of all, but I loved writing her. She was so fun to write as a character because I knew at the end what was going to happen to her. And I just put her through it too. So it was really fun to write that. I don't think in the other books, they're messy. The characters are messy. Relationships are messy. They have to work through things. But I wouldn't, like you said, Suzanne, I wouldn't call them toxic, but they certainly were messy. But yeah, Ishimiko she was great. She got hers in the end, but it was great. It was fun to write her.
Awesome. Brad, back to you.
I got one.
Yeah.
I was thinking originally about the primary relationship, which is why I was talking about the romantic relationship, but talking about contagonists, which are actually an archetype in that it's often the supporting character who actually is undermining the main character. Not necessarily an antagonist, but it's the best friend who doesn't help you. It's the best friend who is constantly saying, that's the wrong person for you, or you should be doing this. And I think that's really an important sort of foil for one of your main characters, to have that kind of character in your work. And in the book, When Love Comes Around, which was released last fall, that I collaborated on with Ronnie Black, it just occurred, the best friend of my main character, who is an alcoholic in recovery, isn't actually urging her to have a drink, but what he does tell her is she's not the same person anymore. She's not the fun person she was. She doesn't go out with the gang. She's a construction worker, and she doesn't go out with the team after work to the bar anymore. And that's a very toxic relationship. It's minor in the book, but it allowed us to show her holding her line in dealing with her issues. But the concept of the contagonist archetype is a good one in that it allows you to put someone in the book that the readers can really dislike because they can see them not supporting your main character.
That's a great point, and I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, and now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that character, that one, you never know what to call them except for, terrible.
Right.
So jumping off of that, talking about conflict. So messy relationships, toxic relationships, all that conflict can both be internal and external. And then sometimes in that the books have a different external conflict, like a big storm's coming for everybody. And yes, I am thinking of Rad's books when I said that. So when you're writing both conflict, both internal and external, whether it's between the people or between the people and the environment, how do you decide how much time that you're going to spend on both, and how much is too much on those? So since I added to that question, I'm really going to have to pick on the person who's coming here first. But Suzanne, you look so prepared, so it's going to be you. Tell us about your conflicts.
Wow. Okay. I obviously in both my young adult fantasy novels and in Good Game, there's a lot of external conflict. I just in a fantasy novel, I just felt like, there's always going to be conflict, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the genre. In this book, in my latest Good Game, I really wanted to write about how difficult it is to be um, a, a woman in gaming. And that's because I've spent my entire life gaming, and online gaming, when it came around 15 years ago, really upped the ante for how abusive the kind of abuse you can get as a woman online. And so, yes, it's a romance and it is hopeful, but at the same time, I wanted to get that message across about how toxic it really is. Um, so for me, there has to be a lot of that external pressure on these characters, and for me, making the choice about how much of the external and how much of the internal, which you talked about. I actually put that on Barbara, my editor, because
Nice.
because
Smart.
really, I don't know. I feel like I focus way too much on external conflict. I like external conflict. So for me, I need someone else to say, you're not giving us enough of the struggle internally that these characters are going through. And I think that comes from having done video and film early in my career. I see everything through the camera lens versus through the head. And that is a struggle for me as a writer. I really have to focus on that. And so for me, it is definitely having beta readers and having an editor like Barbara, who I'll say is a wonderful editor, having them tell me when I'm putting too much external and not enough internal into it is the key for making my book better.
This is a very interesting answer, and not just because you complimented me inside.
But that helped.
Yeah, definitely helped. Okay, Radclyffe, what about you?
I think it depends on what you're writing, which is exactly what Suzanne was just saying. The book that came out in March, I'm like 2 books ahead of that already, so I've already forgotten what I wrote. Swept Away is a first responders, which automatically means there's going to be a lot of external conflict. I think that it's easier to write external conflict. It's always easier to have things outside the characters that you can put pressure on them, whether it's from family, whether it's from their occupation, whether it's the environment. Those are the easy things to do. I think that the internal conflict is always harder for all of us. It requires us to look at the psyche and emotional composition of our characters and figure out the unique aspects of each of them that is going to contribute to the conflict between them. But if you're writing a romance in particular, that's essential. The balance, I think, comes from the story. And I think that you can use the external conflict, which is the easy part to write, to drive the internal conflict, to bring it out. So they kind of help each other. I don't worry about the balance. For me, the challenge is to show them moving from whatever the conflict is that keeps them apart to the point where they can be together, which is essentially the entire story arc. And I don't worry about what elements I use, as long as there's a very good reason for them not to be together for about 80% of the book. If you're writing a romance, it's different if you're writing something else that's primarily speculative fiction or paranormal work or a mystery intrigue. Then the romance may be backgrounded a little bit more.
One of my authors told me one time that they had a hard time with internal conflict because they did not want to face those kinds of emotions themselves. And writing it was forcing them to do so. And I said, I don't care how dead you are inside, your characters have to feel things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to go there even when it's hard.
It's true. Suzie.
As I was listening to everybody, Secrets Under the Junipers, which is the book that's out right now for me, was a very difficult book to write because of the subject matter of the cold case and the little girl being abducted and then found 30 years later murdered. But when I was writing the conflict, the internal conflict of each of the characters, it was tough because I want balance. I think we all need balance. We all have that sense of, is this story balanced? If you're just writing one particular thing, like if you write a blend, if you have romance in it and action adventure, there has to be balance in that story. And if one is too much, if the conflict, external conflict is too much and the romance is not enough, you've got some problems in your story. So as I thought about that, and it was very difficult because of like this, your other author that said internally, sometimes you are affected by what you write because of your own personal experiences. So when I write conflict, um, I try not to get involved in. I try to step back and not have myself involved in. It's hard. It's hard to do personally to try to remove myself. But that's one of the tools that I have to use is to step back and say, okay, you're not this character. It's just a character. just a character. It didn't really happen to you. So I try to step back and put myself into that character and remove my own feelings from it and try to get that balance that you need as a writer, that you don't overstep it. It's not easy to do. It's really not. And you think you got it, and then you'll get a review and someone will say the very thing that you were trying not to do or pick it apart or whatever. So, you just have to be careful.
I agree. And stop reading reviews, Suzie.
Yes, I do.
Something.
I only read the good ones now.
That's good.
Okay, Sam.
Well, I would echo a lot of the sentiments that everyone has shared so far, and Suzanne actually stole my answer in that I rely heavily on my wonderful editor, who is Barbara, to
Wow,
support
you're
me.
really getting the kudos today.
Yeah,
I
really.
know. This panel's going great.
Well, I mean, it's true though. Editors do so much to support our stories and to make sure we are striking that balance between internal and external conflict. I like to think I get better at it with each book, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to keep writing anyway. But like Radclyffe was saying, it does depend on what you're writing too. I write mainly fantasy and historical romances. So with the fantasy stories, there is a lot of external conflict, and the romance is often kind of underneath what's happening in the story. And I work to weave it into all of that external conflict. Compared to my historical romances, which are a little more romance focused. So I do have to be sure I'm diving into the internal struggle of my characters. And I personally tend to struggle with the pacing of the romance, which is perhaps why I don't write romance outright. But I either rush things or things are moving too slowly. And so that's a work in progress for me, I feel like. And I also, for the internal conflicts, I really love exploring guilt and obligation. Perhaps it's the former Catholic in me or the eldest daughter, whatever it is. It tends to inform my work a lot. So, yeah, I try to strike the balance, but it does depend on what I'm writing. And I have a great support team in that process.
Love those extra kudos on there. So let's talk about the main characters. Usually if you have a relationship in your book, if you have a romance arc in your book, we're not going to call it toxic, but if they have like a messy relationship, or if you have one character who has a tendency to like run away when things get hard or something like that, if you have a character who does not deal with things well, but you want them to be with the other character in the end, what's the secret to keeping that relationship dramatic, but making the characters relatable, making everybody root for them and not just saying, "Oh, this one, woman, I hate her." Um, so Sam went last time, so let's pick on her to go first.
Okay. Um, so what's the secret to making that sort of relationship relatable?
Or to make that character likable still and not just.
Right. My character from my latest work, Discovering Gold, Julia Holt, popped into my mind when you were asking that. Again, a character who grapples with guilt and past trauma. She is somebody who is quick to run away, although she is trapped in a tiny mountain town in the 1920s in Colorado, so she can only run so far as the local gin joint. And that is where she tends to go to ignore whatever feelings she is feeling through the first part of that story. And those feelings amplify when she meets my other protagonist, Eleanor, who she starts to fall for. And I think when I'm working through a romance and the characters are getting to know one another, the important thing for me is to try to keep it as grounded in reality as possible. I think, messiness and, what did you call it? Toxic relationships, um, are, they're people might gravitate towards those because they're relatable, because we are all a little bit messy, I like to think, and have made choices that perhaps we regret, or whatever it may be. So I think if I am able to ground the story in something that is relatable, even if it's taking place in a fantasy world or in a different time, if the characters are feeling and acting on those feelings in a way that I, as a reader, can see and reflect upon, then hopefully I'm striking that good balance between the messiness and the relatability.
I think you do, in my very humble opinion.
Oh, thank you.
Suzie.
Um, Boy, I love messy relationships. They just bring so much to the story. I'm a author who writes blend. I write action, adventure, romance. I've never written just a romance, full romance before. I love action and I love conflict with my characters. I think the key to writing a good blend of that is making sure that um, you're realistic in your writing for the characters. I don't mean just realistic for just writing, but that whatever you're doing is believable. It's realistic. It's I have a saying for my writing is get all the stupid out before you send in your edit. And then when I have my editor, Shelley Thrasher is my editor. We talk about at the end. I say, "Well, did we get all the stupid out?" So, but I think that the interaction between those characters, wherever they are, if they're the main characters, secondary characters, wherever, because secondary characters play a vital role in your story. They move the main characters along. It's essential that you have secondary, and I think the more colorful they are, and the more conflict that they can have, balanced conflict. I don't just think you could throw something in just to throw it in. I think that's not something that a writer should do. Is just, oh well, pick that up here and throw it in because we need it. It has to be a logical reason why the conflict is there. So I think that I love messy. I love conflict and I love messy. I think it makes the story for me.
And you think that's relatable because it's like everybody is a mess sometimes?
Oh yeah, I like every single one of us has had issues in our lives, and if you haven't, I promise you, you will. I promise you will.
This sounds like a threat.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, if I have had it, you're going to have it. That's the way.
You get ready.
Yeah, that's right. I just think that it's part of life. It's how we grow. It's how we experience things. I think about relationships like Rachel and Claire in the Shadow series because it was a 3-book series. We got to see that I got to write them in their progression as wife, as a married couple, and from the very beginning to them being married and then establishing that relationship and what happened to them. And it was messy. I mean, you look back, it was a messy relationship. They had a lot to work out, and that's true. That's just everyday life.
Radclyffe, what do you think?
Give them a puppy. If you want to redeem a character, or this is often spoken of when you write an alpha hero, for example, who's basically arrogant, remote, caustic. You have to find a way to show that the other character finds something unusual or surprising about them that starts to build the bridge, even though they may appear to have a toxic relationship initially. You have to show a hidden side of one of the characters, that character that you want to redeem in the end. And you need to show the other character being surprised by that element. So you take an alpha hero and you give them something to nurture, for example. I like kittens and puppies. That's kind of like iconoclastic at this point to give them a puppy, but basically to give them an attribute that the other character is surprised by and suddenly thinks there's more to them than I realized. They're not as toxic as I thought they were. And that confuses them. And that confusion will allow you to then show those characters starting to get closer because they start to be curious about each other. So I think the element of surprise and small acts of tenderness, kindness, empathy, anything that humanizes your character that is the toxic character allows you to make a believable relationship as time goes on.
That's awesome. It's just soften those rough edges a little bit. Give them a puppy. I never thought about that, but I'm going to
Really?
say that from now on. There's going to be so many
Puppies work.
puppies. That is awesome. Suzanne.
Hey, so, as I mentioned in what I write, generally the toxic characters are secondary characters. I mean, in my fantasy series, the bad guy is so obsessed with one of the main characters, he's willing to murder somebody. So, I mean, pretty toxic. But I'm going to give you an example from my latest obsession, which is Thai GL dramas. I am watching a series called Girl Rules. In the very first episode, they introduce an incredibly toxic character. She's an ex. She ghosted her ex. She disappeared for a year. She shows up in the very first episode, knocks on the door with a birthday cake. And her ex is about to have relations with another woman at that moment. She barges in. She has a layered dialogue with the other woman, which is there's a lot of innuendo. With the cake, she takes her fingers, takes the icing, and offers it to the other woman, who refuses because there's a lot of innuendo about sharing. She takes her fingers, puts them in her mouth, licks off the icing, and flips her a bird. And that is our introduction to this toxic ex character. And to me, I'm hooked. Like, I don't like toxic characters. They generally turn me off in my own writing. They are secondary. She's a primary character, and I love her. One of the reasons I love her is she's charismatic and cruel, and her introduction is incredibly memorable, along with pithy dialogue. So, what's going to keep me with that character is you have to drop in some backstory for me as it goes along, because I need to know how'd she get here. Like, why'd she ghost her? What's happening? How is she? Why is she this pithy, kind of cruel, in a really wonderful way, character? And the other thing, I think, to Radcliffe's point was, you have to show me there's some vulnerability in that character somewhere. You have to. Because otherwise she's just cruel and charismatic. That's all she is. So that's my example of, I wish I could write this. That is the scene I am forever going to be chasing, is how do you introduce somebody like that and do it well?
Well, now it's going to be somebody from off camera gives them a puppy. So I think I'm obsessed with that now. It's going to be everything. So let's talk about a time when you were writing, and either this can be the main relationship, or you've got a side character or background character or something. And you were like, it's too much. this person is either too toxic, or this relationship is too messy, or this person's hard edges, even I can't soften them. I've even had somebody before I thought was going to be a competing love interest, and I'm like, no, they're too terrible. I have to make them a villain. So has anything like that ever happened to you where you were like, no, I have to change this character either on some level or shift their position in the story, from best friend to contagonist or something like that? And let's go with Suzie.
As you were explaining that and asking that, formulating that question, I was thinking of Secrets Under the Junipers and the killer of the little girl. I really struggled with making sure that he was someone that they didn't totally hate at first. First, you don't know who he is. I mean, it takes the book to find out who this person is. So I had to be careful every time his character was written into the story without giving away the story. I want to be careful here, but I had to be careful when I wrote him to make sure that they didn't say, oh, he is, he's the person. Look at the way he acts, yeah. Look the way he acts. That's him. I wanted to be really careful. And so what I did was I went online and I watched some videos of Ted Bundy and how he acted and what he did, all during his trial, especially during his trial, how he acted, and the way that people talked about him and what they said about him. and the main thing that was said throughout, that everybody that knew him said, I can't believe it was him. I can't believe he did that. And so that's kind of what I had to look at it. It's hard. It's hard to write characters and get that are evil, essentially evil, or that are out to do you harm. It's hard to write them and make sure that line is where it needs to be, so you can bring them into the reader and make them believable, make a character believable.
Suzanne.
I'm thinking of Lothair in my fantasy novels because, he's you're introduced to him in the first chapter and he's burning somebody at the stake. So, how was I going to make him, soften him or make him vulnerable? And to that point, I think back to what I was saying in the last one, I really relied a little bit more on giving you a little bit of backstory, making him that child that was ripped from his family, threw him away because of his power. Has magic, basically, essentially. And so for me, it was relying on you sympathizing with a child who's been basically, rejected by his own family. And that's the way that I sort of made him relatable. And also the fact that he feels love. And to me, love is everything, every character I think in my novels so far has been driven by love. And either to extremes. In his case, he's very obsessed with the other character. Like I said, to the point he'll commit murder. And I think that was my way of making him be somebody that, even though he's bad, he's not a cardboard baddie.
Brad.
I have a real hard time writing characters with negative aspects. I can write villains and antagonists who I don't have any interest in redeeming. But when I write characters who have significant barriers to forming relationships, it's usually something that I know can be redeemed. My biggest problem has always been writing seductresses who I want to make be like the antagonist in the story, but I always end up really liking them. And so then I end up, softening them too much as time goes on. So I have a hard time holding on to my negative characters unless I make them obvious antagonists or villains. Otherwise, as Suzanne just said, it's in the backstory. Like when I start out with a character who has significant issues in forming relationships, it always comes from the backstory. And eventually, you, by revealing the backstory and then showing how the interactions and the events of the story bring them up against those issues and how they get over them in your story, is how you redeem them, if that makes sense.
It does. Sam.
I really enjoyed hearing everybody's thoughts on this, and I feel like I have so many thoughts in my brain that I'm going to try to streamline into an answer. But I was thinking about, well, obviously, I have to go back and rewrite things and add things in for characters quite a bit. With messier or toxic characters, those tend to be my antagonists or the villain of the story. And I liked the cardboard baddie uh, description of making sure those characters are as dimensional as I
Yeah.
can make them. You know, they're not just bad for bad sake. And listening to Suzanne describe that introduction of that character made me think of lots of other introductions I've seen of characters who are um, usually labeled the villain in stories. Like I think of Villanelle's introduction in Killing Eve. And that was such a good like character intro of who she is. But then it made me ask the question, what made her that way? And that's something I try to keep in mind when I'm writing the characters in my story. Um, just not just my leads, but the characters who are on their peripheral, and maybe the male character who really wants to be in a relationship with one of my leading ladies, but is not getting the hint and he's going about it the wrong way. How can I get into his mindset of why he's not understanding things or how he's going to react when he learns he's not going to be picked by her? Or the villains in my fantasy novels, why are they doing what they're doing? What's driving that? What caused them to believe that this is the right thing to do in this story? So I try to think about those things in the story. Like everyone else was saying, backstory can help a lot with those things to show that on the page. I can get carried away by the external things of the actions of, the bad character in the story, like a rum smuggling mission gone wrong, or the big battle is taking too long, and I can lose track of, okay, why are we doing this here? Why is this character doing this? Why did they show up? Um, so rewrites definitely happen as a result of that. But it is a fine line of making sure I'm keeping everything as relatable and three-dimensional as possible.
That's awesome. Well, we've got a few minutes left here, so we've got one question from the audience. Olga asks, which of your books didn't quite find its audience, but you wish more people would discover it, and she would like a title, or she says, better yet, a couple of titles. And I think for this one, we're going to start. I believe I know which of you has the least amount of books and which of you has the most. And I believe, Suzanne, at this point, you have the least amount of titles. So maybe it might be a little bit easier for you to answer this one first.
Yeah. Okay, well, I've got my Valmora series, which is my young adult fantasy. So you can start with A Talent Within. It does have a second book, A Talent Ignited. And my contemporary romance, which is Good Game, which came out last year, which is about esports. So, and you don't have to enjoy video games and you don't have to know anything about video games. It just takes place in a video game world and can be hopefully eye-opening for people who don't realize how that environment can be for young women in particular.
I would also like to point out that Suzanne's fantasy, you also don't have to be a mega huge fantasy fan. It is very accessible for anybody. And in fact, because of her history background, reads very historical at many points.
Thank you,
Sam, I
Barbara.
think you have the next lowest number of titles.
I will choose Adrift, which was one of my historical romances. I really loved writing that one. It takes place in Southern California in the 1920s during the Prohibition era. It follows a woman who has sort of fallen into a life of rum smuggling. And she ends up falling for a grifter, a daughter of grifters, con artists, and who is sort of attached to the prohibition movement. So there's a lot of fun circumstances that they have to navigate. Fun being a very loose term for being a queer woman in the 1920s. But I had a lot of fun writing it. I really enjoyed the research for that one, and it's based on an actual events, actual locations in the San Diego area. So I really enjoyed that one.
Susie.
I have two. The first one is the second book in the Shadow series called Shadows of Steel. It's one of my favorite books, and I think it's because it's a three-book series. The second one, sometimes you don't get that one, but yeah, that would be the one. It's just a continuation of Rachel and Claire, and boy, they go through it in that story. That's where Ishiyamiko was introduced into the storyline too. The other one is Enigma. Enigma one. Enigma is the historic World War II historic. It's set in the United States about 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor. And the reason I wrote it that way is because there's a lot of books about World War II in Europe, and there's a lot of books, in England and all over the world. There's a lot of books, but there's not a lot of stories about the United States and what happened in the United States right before the war. So that one, like I said, won a Goldie Award, but it's not a big seller. I don't know if it's because it's just history and World War II or what, but I love the characters in that book and the storyline in that story.
Brad.
I probably have half a dozen or more that I think were really good books that flew under the radar, and a lot of them are standalones because people tend to really like the series that I write. The one that jumped into my mind is The Color of Love, which I wrote, I don't know how long ago, 10, 12 years ago. It's based in the publishing industry, interestingly enough. It's a standalone romance. I think it's a really good, interesting romance, and I loved it because it was set in the publishing world. And the other that I would like to plug a lot is the paranormal romances that I write as L.L. Rand, which I know a lot of people think, and I got emails, I'm not going to read those because it's not a Radclyffe book. And I guarantee they are Radclyffe books, but they are paranormal romances. And I think that I wrote them because it gave me the opportunity to write unbridled sex, which is exactly the reason I started writing them. And I'm now writing the first in a spin-off series to The Midnight Hunters, which is also going to be a paranormal romance, which is hopefully going to come out in the fall. So The Midnight Hunters is the first in that series. If you wanted to give it a look, it might be better than you think.
Awesome. I think those are all awesome recommendations, and I've read all of them. So that was cool. That made me feel very good about myself. We have another question from the someone in the chat roll. When your favorite toxic character from your books? I think if we're very quick, we might be able to answer that one. If anybody's got one, just yell it out there, raise your hand. If somebody's just like, this comes to mind, it's this antagonist.
I'm going with Lothair from A Talent Within.
That's a good one, Sam. I saw your hand up.
I'm going to go with the contagonist in Discovering Gold, the best friend of Eleanor Sue, who thinks she knows what's best for Eleanor and is always giving her life advice, even though it's not correct.
Susie.
Ishiyamiko in Shadows of Steel.
Awesome. Rad.
I pass.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to have to figure that one out for yourself then. So that is unfortunately all we have time for. I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists and remind everyone that the authors featured in the Bookathon all have ebooks on sale on boldstrokes.com. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, Barbara. Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.